Hi everyone, welcome to the A to Z Analytics channel, where I plan to share my knowledge of data analytics and business intelligence through Microsoft Excel and Tableau. I hope you enjoy this video and learn something valuable. If you hit the subscribe button and enable notifications, you'll be notified when new videos are uploaded, which I will be doing on a weekly basis. Okay, so today I'll be giving you an introduction to Excel pivot tables. I'll begin by explaining what pivot tables are. I'll show you what you need for a pivot table, how to think about what pivot tables you can create, and finally show you how to get started with the pivot tables. There is a lot to learn with pivot tables, so I'll be following up with more advanced videos in the future. So what are pivot tables? Pivot tables are one of Excel's most useful features for analysing data. So learning about them is valuable for anyone that wants to get involved with data analysis. When I started looking at pivot tables, I wasn't that successful because I didn't really understand the purpose or logic behind them. I think I thought that they were just used for rearranging the layout of tables. However, their true purpose is to summarize data without writing any formulas. Summarizing the data can be done in a variety of different ways, such as totals, averages, running totals, percentage of totals, and many others. The data can be summarized by various categories depending on your data and reorganized or pivoted to cut the data in different ways. Once you know the basics, creating pivot tables takes little time, less than a minute. If you need to change your approach to analyzing the data, this can also be achieved swiftly without having to rewrite lots of formulas, which can often be the case when dealing with other stakeholders. So what do you need for pivot tables? Pivot tables require a structured data source. By this it means that the data needs to be ordered into rows and columns with no gaps in the data. If there are any gaps, it may lead to issues in your resulting calculations, or they may form a category of their own null values. This category can be filtered out if required through the pivot table, depending on what the impact would be. I have created a simple dataset to illustrate the format required, as you can see here on my screen. It contains data across a number of dates, 2 regions, Europe and North America, and the sales figures, sales volume and costs. Within this dataset, there are 2 different types of data. Region is a descriptive type of data, which can be used to classify different areas of the data. Sales figures, sales volumes, and costs are numerical data which we can summarize or use in calculations. Dates are stored as numbers in Excel and generally used for classification purposes. In this dataset, I've kept the values the same across the time period but varied by region to make it easier to understand how the data is treated when used in a pivot table. How can you decide what pivot table to create? So what I like to do is, with my dataset in front of me, is grab a sheet of paper and draw it out. Here I have a simplification of our dataset, the categories and the type of data we have. This is the data we have to work with and create pivot tables, and what I draw to start with if I was drawing out. From here we might start drawing out the possible tables. In this first example, I have created a table that shows the total sales, this being the total sales across both regions and all dates. I might add the number of sales to see both the total dollar value and number of sales, which is across both regions and all dates. Then I could bring in a dimension, such as region, to see how sales compare across both regions. This table will then show a breakdown of the values for each region. There is also the option to see totals across both regions, which is shown in the image as the bottom row. This total may make sense in this example, but you could also see a total across the rows, which would be the sum of sales dollar value and number of sales, which would not make sense. For this reason, you may need to make some decisions around which totals appear, but I can cover that off later. You may also want to view how sales by region changes over the dates, which would be a common use. As you can see, there are many ways which you can cut even a simple data set such as this. What you draw out will depend on the dataset you have and the questions you have of it. Drawing different tables out is a great way to explore and think about the data you have. Now I will run through these examples in Excel. Returning to our data table, I will click into any cell in the region of the data table. Then I'll select Insert from the ribbon and then Pivot Table. In the pop-up box you will see options of where the data is located, where the pivot table will be created, and if you want to add the data to the data model. For this example I will use the defaults, which show that I am going to use all the data in the simple dataset and create the pivot table in a new worksheet. Once you click OK, a new worksheet will be created with a prompt to build a report by choosing fields in the pivot table field list as shown in this box. The pivot table field list will appear to the right of the worksheet. The upper pane shows all 5 columns which we had in the simple dataset from which we can select. To begin creating a pivot table, we can drag the fields into the 4 lower panes, or ticking the checkbox next to the desired fields will generate a pivot table, but this may not be laid out how you wish. In the first example I drew, I had the total sales value. I can create this by dragging sales to values, which then creates the pivot table sum of sales. The default result is generally for Excel to add up all the values, but this can be changed to average or other measures, which I will show in a later video. Dragging number of sales to values will also create a pivot table which replicates my second drawing to show the total for both value and volume. Next I drew a table which broke down the sales by region. Dragging region to row creates this table, and a grand total is also created which sums the rows. In my final example, I created a pivot table which showed the sales value over time. To create this from my current pivot table, I would drag number of sales out of the values pane and drag date to the columns pane. This shows the sales for every date for each region and the daily total in the bottom row and the region total in the final column. This layout may not be the most eye-pleasing, and you can pivot the table by dragging the date to rows and region to columns. When I first dragged date to rows, you may have noticed that the table repeats dates for both regions. I'll cover off the layout and how hierarchy can be created in a later video. How you lay out the table will depend on the data you have, and how it looks best will also have an impact if you're using it to create pivot charts, which I will also save for another day. There is another pane called filters which we did not draw an example for. By dragging a field to the filter pane, you can filter data within that field. If I remove region from the columns and date from the rows, we will return to the total sales value, 8.75 million. I can then drag region to filters, and a filter drop down will appear above the pivot table. You can drag multiple fields to the filter pane and filter on each. Clicking on the drop down arrow reveals the filtering options. The default is all, which is highlighted in grey. Clicking on Europe, for example, will filter only for the sales value which relates to Europe, and the total will be updated to 3.75 million. In this case we only have 2 regions, but in other cases there may be multiple classifications, and if you click the filter drop down again, you can see at the bottom there is the option to select multiple items. Checking this turns on the option to select multiple classifications in the field for filtering. For example, our dataset could include South America, and we could filter for both North and South America to exclude Europe and see those sales results. Thank you all for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this video and learnt from it. I would be grateful if you could hit the like button to give the video a thumbs up, as it really helps spread the word. If you would like to see more of my videos, please subscribe so you can be notified of when more videos are uploaded. You will also find more videos if you head over to my channel. If you have any questions, feedback or topics you would like covered, then please leave a comment below and I will respond. I love feedback and learning from others. All the best, Aaron.